said, ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome back to this amazing summit where we've got some esteemed guests, speakers who are all set to share their knowledge with us and also deliberate over some critical topics which will only help us grow as a nation and also as a system. With that said, the topic of this panel discussion is Customer is the King, and it's all about the King's experience. I'm sure with the way we are heading today, I mean, be it the website, be it your apps, be it your any kind of services, we ensure that it's customer-centric. It's appealing to the customer, because we get it right is when the customer will come back to us. That said, I would introduce you all to our panel, and starting with the moderator of this panel, introducing Ms. Geetika, Raheja, Director Payments Transformation, PwC India. We've got Mr. Anand, Bhatia, Chief Marketing Officer, Fino Payments Bank. Mr. Ankit, Goenka, Head of Customer Experience, Bajaj, Allianz General Insurance. Ms. Jijy, Oommen, Chief Technology Officer, Kinara Capital. Ms. Sharatee, Ghosh, Senior EVP Customer Experience Center and Virtual Relationship Management, Kotak Mahindra Bank. And I would now request Ms. Geetika Raheja to please take over.
Sure. Thanks, Ankita. So, hi everyone. Great to be. This is one of my first virtual connect sessions that I'm doing this season, but very happy to be here today. So, as part of the digital payment story so far, we've seen tremendous growth in the country. We've seen, 3x and 4x growth in terms of payments across different channels. But when we come, I think one of the most remarkable stories for me personally is that last year the mobile payment story actually overtook the in-store payments that we've been doing all these years. So that I think is a significant milestone, and it's also indicative of customer preferences, right? So where are we headed in terms of the customer preference is clearly becoming visible. We are seeing a shift towards UPI very slowly in the country, but in terms of consumer apps, we are seeing a significant uptake of UPI through consumer apps compared to the traditional banking apps. Earlier it was cashbacks and incentives which were driving it, but I think slowly that is on the wane. And it is genuinely, the ease of use that is now defining what the customers are choosing to transact and how they're using to transact. So, a quick anecdote, personal anecdote, in fact. My husband was recently making a transaction, and it was an online. He's fairly savvy with mobile payments, and he was making a mobile payment transaction where the vendor had sent him a Bharat QR, and he tried to scan the QR 3 times through his bank app. It did not work. He then moved to one of these consumer apps, which is connected to the same bank, and then made the transaction. It took him less than a few seconds to complete the entire transaction, and he sent across the snapshot, and the transaction was completed. Now, clearly there is, now for him as a user, he's probably never even going to try doing it through the bank app again, right? So these are, I think, just small shifts that we see happening. So consumer experience, in my opinion, can be a lot about the jazz and the cashbacks. But just the simplicity of doing a basic transaction, that is what really stays back with the customer, right? But having said that, I think that's set the ground for the customer experience discussion today. I'm now going to open the panel and maybe ask each of our panelists to have a quick overview of what is their view in terms of, is customer experience really driving payments in the country today? So maybe we can start with Sharatee and then move on to Srini, Ankit, Jijy, and maybe Anand.
Thanks, Geetika. Nice introduction. I agree with you. In payments, exactly, what your husband faced. The 2 pillars are convenience. The first pillar is convenience. The next pillar is also safety. And these are the drivers of an enhanced customer experience. It's extremely critical. There is no way other than that. While I think, customers crave the ability to be liberated from the security risks associated with cash payments. And that's where I think banks need to be a little more circumspect. However, speedy checkout processes are critical. Customers do expect that the process has to be secure. Nobody will probably go to a consumer payment app and have very high standards of risk and security, but that will be a baseline on which they expect their banks to come through. The way I look at it is realistically at the point of payment, it has to be seamless, it has to be low on effort, and it has to be secure. So that's the way I look at it.
Great. Thanks, Sharatee. Maybe we can move to Ankit.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. And Geetika, as Sharatee mentioned, you actually put it very, very nicely. Right? Because when you talk about payments and we talk about customer experience, and especially within Indian context, I strongly believe that India is poised for the best position when it comes to payments. The payment systems today in India are well advanced than some of the developed markets. We are already seeing, the likes of UPI and IMPS, some of the developed countries actually copying it or, just taking and going ahead with that, right? That just shows that, we have really arrived, I would say, right? And looking at the numbers that the UPI, IMPS, and all the digital payments are doing, it's mind-boggling. Okay, the customer's experience angle to payments, and why it becomes important is if you really look at, for example, UPI, while it's a we say that there is an app where you need to scan, you need to enter the VPA, or there are some apps who are providing a much seamless process. But what is the real value for the customer? The real value for the customer and the end user is that while the actual fund settlement happens on T+1, T+2 types, the end user is able to utilize those funds or get a credit, right? And that's the value which is getting delivered, instantly, and that's the experience. So we talk about a lot of technologies today, but if those technologies are not really going to help the end user, the experience will not get, enhanced. And I would say the UPI is a perfect example of how a technology can be used to its best use, to deliver a super customer experience.
Great. Thanks, Ankit.
So those are my initial thoughts and looking forward for the discussion.
Yeah. Srini, maybe we can hear you on the topic.
Sure, thanks, Geetika. And I think Ankita missed introducing me. I'm Srini Kasturi. I work for Barclays, based out of London, and I'm responsible for the global mass payments and innovation and product management function. And my perspective on this is slightly different because my client segment is slightly different. My client segment is the corporate treasurer of large companies. And these treasurers face a lot of pressure in times of geopolitical uncertainty and economic uncertainty as we are currently in. They have a deeper need for visibility and control. That's really what's driving their consumption behavior. And their experiences are informed by their retail experiences. All the things that you've spoken about, that's what they expect from their corporate bank as well. And that can be a pretty big challenge for a corporate bank to meet. Omni-channel presence, enabling workflows, removing paper, reduction in checks and cash volume. Those are the kinds of things that corporates struggle with, and they've had to accelerate their digital journey to improve the experience of their clients. So as a corporate bank, our role is to bring to bear solutions that help businesses put their customers first. And that is easier said than done. But certainly we've seen a huge acceleration in digitization of workflows in corporates. Obviously, UPI is an example of consumer shift because of a superior experience. But it's actually an example of how regulators are responding to putting customers first, putting consumers first, and treating consumers truly as king. And this is a global phenomenon. We see that with various instant clearing schemes. There's about 40 of them globally. And we see that with the convergence of card and payment rails. We're going to see that with the European Payment Initiative in Europe, where card payment schemes will run on SEPA. So those are kind of the examples that come to mind, Geetika.
Perfect. Thanks, Srini. In fact, one of the topics that we will be discussing today is the shift of experience from retail to the corporate world. How does the concept change from retail to corporate and SMEs in between? Great.
Sure.
Maybe Jijy, you can go next.
Thank you so much, Geetika. On the point of the customer experience on digital payments, I completely echo with the thought process shared by all other panelists, right from how do the banks and financial institutions need to enable customers to have seamless customer experience, both in terms of the speed, efficiency, making the journey seamless, and security, right? So all are very, very important pillars for define the overall customer journey with respect to the digital payments. And I think India is doing absolutely well, and of course a lot more to be grounds to be covered. But I still feel that we are as a country we are doing an extremely good job in expanding the entire digital payment ecosystem, right? And we are doing much better over many countries around the world. Now, coming to the recent times, actually, so this digital payment ecosystems have become a big savior, I think, in the COVID times. And, I cannot say with more words that how much it has helped organizations to sail through the entire, the lockdown times and, the social distancing period that, when you're not able to reach out to the customer and transact online, or customer can't reach out to you in the physical world, how digital payment ecosystems have really helped. Having said that, I do think that the ecosystems can still evolve a lot more from a use case perspective. A lot of now the banks are playing more a back-end role at this point in time, and the majority of the innovations are being driven from either app providers or aggregators side. But then banks have a lot of role to play in terms of seamlessly enabling the transactions, making sure that the transactions are secure, customer gets the right kind of that assurance and safety and all of that. So I think as an ecosystem it is well set, and we have a lot of use cases I could see that coming up, and the usages are going to be much beyond what we see today, right? And customer experience is definitely going to be the defining factor of how people are going to use digital payments going forward as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jijy. Anand, your initial views.
Yeah. So everyone's pretty right that a lot of it really boils down to experience, simplicity. A good designer will anyway make it that way, right? So today, and technology is commodity. So if one guy kind of cracks how exactly to make it simple, well, within 2 days everybody kind of gets there. And especially the kind of consumer segment that I deal with, which is very often the first time digital. So very often it's the first time they have a bank account. What we've seen is that, so while the form factor and simplicity and all those things that we've been speaking about are there, for this guy, what really matters is trust. And what will happen if something goes wrong? What do I do? Do I trust this brand that I deal with? I think that becomes mission critical. And especially as the next set of consumers start coming into using digital payments, that becomes actually paramount. And that's where somebody like a Google actually has a huge advantage. I mean, look at the way Google Pay has come from where it was to now brands in the payment landscape of the country, is because inherently you tend to trust Google. You feel Google hai to theek hai, it tells me where to go, it tells me a lot of basic stuff. So it's really, really boiling around that. And of course, the rest has to be in place. I mean, there is no escaping it. But these softer factors of around the brand, what do I do if something goes wrong? I think are big factors in making payments easier and making them far more ubiquitous.
Perfect. Thanks, Anand.
That is the
So great initial views. I think we've got a lot of initial ideas around how security is important, how instant gratification has become really important, how visibility and control for a corporate might be equally, that is paramount, and that amounts to basically a good customer experience. The current COVID situation has completely changed the face of how digital transactions are happening. And finally, the brand and the trust are equally important as far as the experience go. So to start with, maybe we can start with Ankit, some of the initial questions around, for you, payment is a part of a longer transaction journey, right? The entire customer journey, payment is a leg in it. How important do you think is the payment leg vis-a-vis some of the pre and the post? And how much does that define the entire customer experience? And how have you come over the years?
Sure. So if we look at Geetika from an insurance standpoint, when you rightly put it, right, it's part of the bigger, picture when it comes to the overall journey, right? I'll share two examples, right, and two journeys, right. The first one being actually the purchase of a policy, right? It's simple, right? Somebody wants to purchase a policy, right, and there you need to enable payments. Now, how payments and the entire digitization around payments have helped us over these years is, if you look at today at Bajaj, we have created our own payment page, and we call it internally as Bajaj Pay, okay? Where we have integrated with all the payment methods today available. Be it your net bankings, your cards, your wallets, UPI, all the payment service, provider apps, or maybe EMIs for that matter. Everything is available. So the key thing from an insurance standpoint which comes into the play is affordability, accessibility, right? So the entire digitization around this payments have actually helped not only us but the entire insurance industry or the other insurance industries as well, by enabling this. Because when we talk about all the EMIs today, on a credit card, now there are EMIs on debit cards as well, right? So from that point of view, the entire affordability piece becomes very, very easily accessible, because it's actually seamless, right? You don't have to go to a bank to get your loan approved. It's the pre-approved thing. You're just going, if you are wanting to take a policy, you just enter your mobile number, it goes and validates with the bank, you get an OTP, you authorize it, and it's done. And that's the journey that we have also taken. We have ensured that we are up the pace with the entire payment industry, so that our customers, when it comes to the purchase journey, it becomes seamless. The other critical factor for an insurance company is claims, which is the real moment of truth. Now, to give you an example, what we have done, we have actually empowered, and Anand was talking about trust, right? So we have actually built on that piece and said that why don't we really trust the customers? Our job is to pay claims. That's what we believe in. Each and every insurance company today is to pay claims, right? And when it comes to paying claims, why can't you really empower and trust the customer? So that's what we did. We have rolled out a motor on-the-spot settlement where we say that in case, God forbid, you met with an accident, right, and the accident and the damage is not too high, where you don't have to really get the car towed and all those stuff. Maybe, the windshield has got broken, right, and maybe the amount of the claim would be around 25,000 odd rupees. You don't have to go to any workshop or, call the call center or write an email to register a claim. Just open our Caringly Yours app, click certain photographs, give a declaration, and using the IMPS and the NEFT rails today, which are available, we instantly transfer the funds. So in totality, within 30 minutes, from the time, a customer may have met with an accident to the actual money getting credited in the bank account, it's done. And the final mile of this entire process, couldn't have been possible if the digital payment piece was not stitched properly. Right? Similarly, we have a product on travel, right? Yes, right now the travel insurance is not doing that great because all the travels are not there. But before that, we have enabled that product where we say that in case there is a flight delay, right? The earlier process is that you go and, put in a claim, you scan your boarding pass, you give a declaration and all those stuff. Now, using blockchain and the other technologies, we say that in case your flight is delayed, we already know about it. So while the customer is waiting at the airport for the flight to take off, the money gets credited to the account.
That's so. Yeah, I think
so again,
this is
the last mile of claims wouldn't have been possible. So
absolutely
now those are the critical examples I would say that we have taken to ensure that we are integrated properly with the payment systems.
right. Perfect. That's a great example, Ankit. Right. Moving on to maybe tracking customer experience, right? How do we decide something is a good customer experience versus something is not a good customer experience, right? What are some of the metrics that different organizations are using to track customer experience at their end, right? So traditionally we've been using CSAT scores and NPS scores, but now is that a fair enough representation of the entire experience that the customer is having? Maybe Sharatee, you can tell us a little about that.
Sure, Geetika. So I will actually take on Ankit's examples that he gave, and let me ask that, at the end of that payment that has got processed towards premium of an insurance, many organizations are probably today using CSAT as the primary metric for gauging the customer experience at that time. And we automatically assume that the more satisfied the customers are, the more loyal they will be. Then probably, notably, actually, Fred Reichheld came back and he found little correlation between the satisfaction and the loyalty. And then he brought in the 11-point NPS. But look at exactly what Ankit said, that finally through the blockchain and by putting in, some AI and some amount of analytics and predictive behavior, they made it less effort for the customer. And that's the new metric, I feel, specifically financial services for sure. We need to start measuring something called the customer effort score, which basically assigns ratings between 1 to 5, 5 representing very high effort. So actually the lower the effort on the CES, the better. And this effort is defined as the customer's intention to keep doing business with, for example, the bank. Increase the amount they spend, spread a positive word of mouth, or at least not spread negative word of mouth, etc. I feel in terms of effectiveness of measuring how each of us are doing on customer experience, CSAT is a poor predictor. NPS definitely proved better and has shown to be a powerful gauge for the level at which an organization is on CX. I think CES outperforms both of these matrices in this new age of customer experience.
Sharatee, has this boiled down to has this been defined in terms of metrics further? Is that something that you are working towards at Kotak?
Yes, Geetika, we are. We look at repetitive large transactions. We look at forms customers fill. We look at how many signatures, how many ticks. Is there repetitive information I am taking? If it is, can I reduce the amount of it? So you can't use CES across the board, okay? But you take large, repetitive effort that a customer makes, and then you look at it through the CES lens, make improvements, and then move on to the next. Yes, it's something we are following very critically now.
Great to know there are changing frameworks altogether now. So that's really good. Right. Srini, over to you. We spoke about briefly a little about PSD2. And some of the regulator, I think, at least in India, we have a very active regulator. Right. On the payment space, there have been constant interventions from the regulator. And I think that has in some way helped the uptake also. Also globally, I'm seeing a lot of transition towards open banking, regulations coming in around PSD2. How do you think that? Do you think that is in some way a response to what the customer demands are and what is expected from the end consumer? And how do you think are banks really, paying heed to a lot of these things? Srini, I think you're on mute.
I am, and it takes some getting used to. Where's the unmute button on Zoom, on WebEx, on Microsoft Teams? They're all in different places. Anyway, PSD2, right? When we talk about PSD2, open banking is just one of the outcomes of PSD2. The principles that drive PSD2 are manifold. One is transparency. Do customers know what they're getting into? For example, when you do an FX transaction, like when you withdraw cash at a foreign ATM, you're just getting local currency and you don't know what you're going to get debited in your home currency. That's not fair and it's not transparent. Right. You might not have a choice, but you should know. And that's one of the principles behind PSD2, which is transparency and being fair to clients and customers. So you're supposed to now be under PSD2, be able to see what transaction rates you're being offered. So that's putting consumers, retail consumers, right in front, and giving them, a choice. They're not at the mercy of financial services providers, and that's an example. The other piece is fraud. This is to protect banks, right? Because the easier you make it for consumers to make transactions, the easier it is for fraudsters to make transactions. So multi-factor authentication, alerting, some of those pieces come in. And that's really important because banks take the liability of fraud. So if banks need to be able to make things easier for consumers, then you need a regulatory framework that protects the banks from incurring frauds at massive scales. And finally, there is choice, right? Opening up the innovation ecosystem to allow for the right kind of consumer experiences, whether it's as a bank consumer or as a payment initiator. These are the experiences that open banking aims to provide. You have the neobanks and the fintechs coming out because of this opening up of the innovation ecosystem. And you have the new embedded payment experiences coming in because of the open banking API. And I think my dog really agrees because he's yelling. So I must be saying something right.
Geetika, you need to unmute.
Geetika, you're on mute.
Yeah, Geetika, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, rookie mistakes. Anyway, getting used to it. But I think slowly we are unraveling quite a few layers of this entire customer experience puzzle, right? But the first thing that comes to mind when you say customer experience is maybe, how soon can you complete the transaction? With what ease can you complete the transaction? I think, Srini, you brought to fore some of these discussion points around transparency, fraud, choice, right? And I think all of these are also, deep down inside, very closely related to the customer experience, right? Any fraud tomorrow with the entire open banking framework, if there is a mishap around fraud, the entire experience goes for a complete toss, right? So given the regulatory framework, it's very important for regulators to think through the entire security puzzle, the entire transparency puzzle as well. So yeah, great. Thanks, Srini. Anand, maybe moving to you. In terms of the kind of segments that you work with, right? You spoke about those segments. It's traditionally, we've spoken about experience in terms of the jazz that comes with it, the incentives that come with it, right? But the customers that you are working with, have they been traditionally left out of this entire customer experience planning? Or I know Fino does a lot of work with them, and for y'all, it becomes that much more important for the experience to be seamless across the pyramid. So how are y'all working through the entire experience story?
So you're absolutely right. This consumer segment was pretty much left out because nobody really associates with them. It's very, very difficult for a lot of folks sitting out of nice glass cabins, etc., to really imagine how this consumer is buying or behaving somewhere in rural Darbhanga or the remote outskirts of somewhere in the remotest part of Tamil Nadu. So yes, quite a forgotten lot really. Now you've got to realize that it's important to understand this segment. So we spent a lot of time doing that. And then you start realizing that at the end of the day, the laws of consumer behavior and economics, where they coincide or rather collide, is the world that you really need to leverage. So this customer ultimately is incredibly loss averse. So anything where the guy's going to lose something, big problem. So be it, and time is rather of essence because often it's a daily wage worker and that segment really. So when you start solving for their problems, what happens is one is incredibly simple. So it has to be something that anybody can comprehend. That's one. Secondly, the intermediary plays a very important role. So which is why experience, even in the digital sense, for this consumer becomes a little phygital. Oh. So there is ultimately you want to start using something which is more digital. So maybe a simple app and stuff. But you need an intermediary who's going to handhold the entire process. So that guy starts playing a very, very critical role. Of course, yes, it opens up other challenges where fraud, etc., is possible. So various things can go wrong. But so if that guy is trained well, then the adoption of this chap selling chai under a tree somewhere in Darbhanga on a straight highway becomes that much easier. So our entire effort is towards that. And while a lot of brands have gone the way of quote unquote the cashback and the bribe kind of thing to drive adoption, what we've learned is that if it's a strong enough use case, the consumer sees value and then starts using it. I think UPI, yes, a lot of it was driven by a lot of cashback initially, but since the design is so good, consumers eventually saw that, look, I can do it very easily, and it ticks off some use case that they may have and starts giving them confidence. So a big part of experience in this consumer segment is also making the consumer feel incredibly confident about doing that kind of a transaction. So it's a good mix of a bit of behavioral psychology somewhere, the intermediary playing a very critical role of hand-holding and realizing what this guy really, really wants, and which is loss aversion in that sense. And the other thing that we learned was that if you give the consumer that many more avenues to reach out to you, the experience automatically increases. So physical, somebody calling up, incredibly, we even saw that once this consumer gets access to even a bot, they are lapping it up. The guy is coming on board, the guy is quickly learning how to adopt to this strange new animal which is flickering on a screen. A question is being asked, something happens. And it's lovely to see the experimentation that happens. And very quickly they get it that, okay, boss, this will do these two things for me. And that's all that matters. They're not worried about the 500 possibilities. Do cheez chahiye, do cheez hua, life moves on. So I think that's where the whole the experience part really is. And the more one works on it, the better really it gets. And eventually still boils down to trust. Because what happens when something goes wrong is still a very important question in this consumer segment. And I think handling that part, and wherever we've goofed up, is probably been on that part, that when something went wrong, we just couldn't figure a way out. But where we could, the experience shoots through the roof. Then whether you measure it through NPS, you measure it through actually repeat transactions and higher cross-sell ratios, then it all falls in place.
Right. So you're saying essentially that customer journey of not your best case scenario, of your alternate scenarios is a lot more important compared to defining your base case scenarios.
Yeah, one is that, and I missed you in the middle because of some network issue, but yeah, you're right. It's very clear specifying use cases. Use cases are a great way to work with the consumer segment, making it very clear that this is what will happen. These are the two things, kill ambiguity, and ultimately the consumer is going to use you for 2 or 3 use cases, and one has to be comfortable with that as a thought.
Now, right. Geetika, if I may answer the last question that you asked Anand, which is not just alternates. Obviously, your best case scenario and the most often used by the customer has to be absolutely seamless, but also plan for exceptions, transactions which don't follow that, and then plan for exception handling. And that exception might be 1% of total transactions, but also plan for it.
Right. Absolutely.
I agree, because the actual complaints or the customer angst come from those exceptions only. Because
Right.
the best case scenario, your seamless stuff will just go through, right? And we all know, no system can give you 100% uptime or accuracy, right? If somebody comes and tells me that, hey, my system will give you 100% accuracy, I really don't touch that system at all, because I know, it's just in the air. So I completely agree with Sharatee. The exception management has to be the critical piece.
Perfect. Great. Jijy, moving to you. There's a lot of work that you all do with SMEs, right? So, and traditionally, the way it has happened is that there's a lot of focus on retail, right? Customer experience has largely been focused around this whole retail world. How do you see that changing from a retail to an SME concept? And then maybe Srini can top it up with corporate views around the customer experience topic.
Yeah, great. I think this is definitely something that I'm keen to kind of talk about. So while the buzzwords are all around customer experience, and there, we talk a lot about the retail customers, and they form the critical mass, right? Where the speed, security, convenience, reliability, all that makes a big difference. When it comes to corporates, you got to deal with different types of transactions, right? So you are one side, dealing with your end customers, and the other side, you're dealing with your business partners, right? And then you have the entire banking ecosystem, which has to support you in enabling the transaction seamlessly, right? So, of course, the speed, security, convenience, reliability, everything is definitely critical for corporate transactions as well. But what I do think that is, one of the most important enabler is how do the payment ecosystem get integrated in a more open, seamless manner. And there, what I always felt is that now the businesses like us, right? So we lend money to micro business entrepreneurs, where almost half of them are non-bank customers and half of them are bank customers. Their literacy about the digital systems, I would say is 50-50. So we have done a customer survey in the recent times to see the readiness of our customers using a lot of these digital systems. In fact, we are in the process of a massive digital transformation, which is basically phase 2 of the digital transformation that we have, tried to do in the organization. So what we realized is that, of course, you need to build a massive, digital experience for the customers who are ready for the digital journey. And also you need to build the, the digital ecosystem to give customer experience in the manual world also, because there are people who are not ready for that journey from an end-to-end perspective. So there I do, second the, the thoughts shared by Anand, that how do you enable that, on-ground, service provider from your organization who's dealing with the customer, end customer, right? To do the business in a seamless way, right? So a couple of things that we have tried to do, in Kinara Capital is that, so one is, your entire payment ecosystem. So, businesses like us run on, there are two pillars of our businesses. So one is, the new business underwriting, where we do a lot of disbursements, and the other side collections, right? So, disbursement side, we need to make the disbursement very seamless. So we used to take about 4 to 5 days before to disburse the loan. Today, we have actually cut down everything by digitally enabling the process end to end to less than 1 day, right? And the last leg of the process, so, we have actually done the integrations with several external ecosystems to enable that process. And business building is not easy, right? It's a very complex process. And there, you don't have a straightforward logic to, gather information from the customer, right? So in that sense, the last leg is the payment, and there you have all these complications of the banking hours and all those issues, right? And of course now RBI has needs a lot of processes which has become a challenge for the banks. Actually now they have to kind of enable the payment services 24/7, right? The NEFTs and RTGS and stuff like that, and that has become a big help for organizations like us, right? So our capability to disburse loans have become now much more faster, quicker, and seamless than it used to be before, right? So we have done banking gateway integrations on one side to make the payouts more seamlessly, and on the other side for receiving the payments, as I said, right, you've got to deal with the banked customers and not so well banked customers, and there in banked also digital and not so well digitally savvy customers. So what we have done is that we are actually Bharat Bill Payments, biller, registered biller. So we literally open our payment avenues to all the available UPI apps in the country today. So I think some 400 odd UPI enabled apps are there, though some of them are very popular, many of them are not, but we are kind of there. So we have gone by the aggregator route, not directly tying up with the app, right? So because aggregator route gives you a lot of flexibility or scalability to kind of, through one pipe, you're able to kind of, open your organization to multiple, the app providers. On the other side, aggregator route is another very important thing, right? So we have tied up with the payment aggregators to take care of the net banking and, the wallets and the cards and all the other types of transactions, right? So at last, I talked about the cash customers, right? So we have the best way that we found to deal with that segment of customers to make their journey seamless is to tie up with the payment bank providers. So there are, these telecom service providers and, these large payment network providers who are available kind of, more or less, I would say close to 24/7, not 24/7 to that extent, but of course, their banking hours are far more flexible, right? And you don't have that Saturday, Sunday headaches and all that, right? So customer can walk to any of their nearby outlets and make the payments. So these are some of the things that we were actually doing, and that has really helped us in the COVID times as well, where our people had difficulties to go to customers and collect the payments. So the enablement on both sides becomes very critical for a business customer like ours. And what I also feel is that the banks there has to be a mechanism to ease the process of integrations. And this is one of the biggest challenges that I have seen, is that it takes a very long time for, doing a banking integration, right? Whether it is, a e-mandate registration or even, the net banking integrations with the banking providers. Whereas what I always felt is that the aggregator integration is far more seamless. So I think as an ecosystem, corporate banking services side, a lot more work needs to be done to make it more seamless for the corporates to, integrate or, adapt to some of these tech evolutions and make things more seamless for our end customers. So that's what my take is. And of course, Srini, from that perspective, definitely can help understand what's happening on that side to make things more easy for the, business customers like us, right? To enable our business transactions to our end customers far more seamless.
Right.
Jijy, I think my team would be getting in touch with you because we do a whole lot of cash pickups, cash management in this space. I mean, unless somebody is already speaking on our end, I don't know, but it is spot on. I mean, the whole power of a network is exactly this, that this consumer who struggles to do things digitally is able to go ahead and make a payment physically at any outlet and continuous service. So I think before this call is over, I think your phone will be ringing.
Absolutely. Most certainly, yes. Let's definitely catch up. Yeah.
Right. Srini, your remarks around the entire corporate experience.
Thanks, Geetika. All of what Jijy said resonates with me perfectly. It is, and actually, I should add that what Sharatee said earlier also resonates with me about CSATs and so on. We moved to something called miserable moments as a measure, where we talk about incidents of issues, and we develop initiatives based around reducing miserable moments for our customers. It's a very self-explanatory measure, right? Miserable moments. It should make sense to you straight away that we want to reduce them. In doing that, we realize that this experience stretches across all the channels that Jijy mentioned. Everybody is time poor. Nobody wants to go stand in line at a branch, but there are processes that require them to do that. And the challenge to the bank is, how do you prevent those processes from dominating the experience? Some of them might continue to exist, but many can be eliminated. So that's challenge. That's the initial challenge on the brick and mortar side. From enabling a payment perspective, one of the things is, in the analog world, the payment went to where the goods were. In the digital world, the payment doesn't go anywhere. It's part of an experience, and it is embedded in the experience. So the less intrusive it is and the more seamless it is, the better it is. And there the challenge is everything that Jijy mentioned, which is how do you embed the payment into the experiences around which consumers aggregate. This is a challenge for the corporate. It is a challenge for the corporate to be able to effectively do all the business that they want to do, whether it's a B2B business or a B2C business, and as in the case of platforms, B2B2C. So there's various layers and levels of experience. And then finally, we come to the Internet of Things for embedded payments within devices. That whole expanse needs a platform, a bank as a platform. And as long as there is platform thinking and not the analog thinking of, I've got a card acquiring API and I'm done. That thinking is no longer applicable, because there could be a request to pay API that you need. There could be a pay later API, pay later in parts API. There's so many experiences that are being enabled. There's a subscription API. There's so many experiences that are being enabled by digital platforms and digital experiences that consumers expect it. And it's up to banks to be able to provide the toolkit for corporates to switch it on, and equally not be tied to the bank, but to be able to continue to operate in a free market with bank providers. So those are the various challenges that banks need to address. Some have begun to address, and it's a journey.
Right. Thanks, Srini. So I think we're just nearing the end of our discussion. Maybe I will probably ask each of you to just conclude with your final remarks around what are the two things, in your opinion, for your set of customers, the two things that come to mind to define customer experience. Maybe we can start with Sharatee.
Sure. I'll say realistically, no one wakes up in the morning desperate to make a payment. But we do wake up wanting to buy a new gadget or the latest book or to refill the fridge with groceries. So in my mind, the ideal payment process for a customer needs to be invisible. It needs to happen without any obvious interaction with a payment application, but has to give the security and peace of mind to the customer that nothing untoward will happen with all this ease.
Thanks, Sharatee. Maybe Srini, over to you.
I just have one observation: the customer is not king. Customer can be queen, customer can be prince, can be princess. There's consumption happening across age groups, across genders, and most likely women are more time poor than men. So something to keep in mind. It's about time, convenience, visibility, control.
Perfect. Thanks, Srini. Short and sweet. Maybe Ankit?
I would say, Geetika, the two things is first being simple, right? Make life simple for the customer, right? That has to be the key priority. And the second piece is, which most of us actually, fail to do, is getting into details of things. Right? Once you get into details and get your hand dirty, and think like a customer, you will find the right solution. Right? So these two basic stuff needs to be there.
Nice. Anand?
Yeah, I think the two big sentiments really is that one, any process has to have zero ambiguity. So any consumer needs to very clearly know what the next step, and the final step is, and what happens if something goes wrong. In the That's kind of a nightmare that even all of us face, especially in a payments process. As Sharatee said, nobody gets up in the morning wanting to make a payment. Frankly, at times interacting with your bank is like interacting with a dentist. It's a really bad thing. So, if something goes wrong, what do I do? And whose neck should I catch? Or what? What's it? How it happen? I think once those two things are to be ultra.
Anand, I think we're losing
something
you.
that we kind of work towards all the time. Thanks.
Okay. Gigi?
As I said, the business that I represent, when I have to really touch upon the digital, payment side, I do think that our digital banking, I would say, I will not just confine my thoughts around only the digital payment side. So literally, we have to, speed is very important to us, right? So when our customers need money, how quickly we are able to get the payment in or disbursement done and, get the money in customer's bank account is extremely critical. And that's a very complex process, right? Of underwriting, onboarding the customer, underwriting, taking the credit decision, then, executing the contract and then, make the payment. So literally in that process, there are several elements where maybe the open banking ecosystem can make things far more seamless for us, especially on the, I do think that on the credit underwriting side. And today we are eagerly waiting for this, this banking aggregation model to really become a reality. And that makes the underwriting process can become much more seamless, right? So that is on one side, I feel something which will definitely improve our customer experience. If that comes. And of course, I want the banks to ease the process of integration. How do we tie with more and more banking systems at much more faster turnaround time to enable these channels? And then on the other side, of course, we want the payment ecosystem to work more seamlessly, which is kind of now it has become a very, very, I would say, commoditized service, and things are working pretty well, I would say. And organizations like, Fino and all, you all are doing a great job. I heard that on the payment banking side, how do we make it more seamless? How do we integrate? So I think that integration layer and, speed of getting the services enabled is very important, right? How do we remove frictions? It takes several months. I have not experienced the process with, Fino, but I do understand that, generally if you have to really do an integration with a bank, the process is fairly lengthy. It takes it takes months and months together, right? So how do we make it more, seamless? So this will actually help us improve our customer journey from a, banking perspective.
Great. Thanks, Gigi. So I'll probably just conclude some of the remarks that we've heard today and maybe just some of the thoughts that we've heard from everyone today. So the idea is to have it as invisible as possible. No one wants to make payments for the sake of making payments, right? It's always part of a larger journey, right? So it's important to define the journey before and after as well. What's also important is to look at exception scenarios and alternate cases. It's not about defining your best case scenario. It's defining your worst case scenario, in fact. Use cases are what is going to define the customer experience. Payment is a small leg of the entire use case. So it's important to define a use case which the customer really needs, right? It's also equally important to define the experience in the manual world and the phygital world, as we heard today. Aggregators and integrators are equally important, and it's important that they are an integral part of your customer experience. So it's important to have them on board with the entire customer journey as well. Some of the new use cases and some of the new features which are coming up around pay later, request to pay, equally important. So that's all the innovation that's happening. And it's not just about making one digital payment, right? It is about building on that and then being able to define use cases around some of that. And finally, keeping the speed at the bare minimum. So I think that in a nutshell is everything that we discussed today. We quickly have, I think, one question that has come up, which said, why do we need bank branches in the first place, where transaction banking can be digital and the advisory needs to be personalized? Do we need bank branches in today's day and age? Are there any volunteers or?
I'll take that one. So, guys, quite right. You really don't need a bank branch anymore, but I guess some amount of brick and mortar presence is necessary because it still helps create that kind of, there is something there. If it's too vaporware, for the want of a better word, especially for a large chunk of consumers, it becomes a challenge. So look at your bank branch more as a permanent billboard, if you may, and a great way of building trust. So it's more a trust point rather than always just a transaction point. Yes, certain kind of transactions, you'll get the guy there, but it's more a trust point and a one at that.
Right.
I'd just like to add that this is about financial inclusion. Banks are a force of good for the economy and for society. And we should not forget that we have a fiduciary responsibility towards banking the unbanked. And branches go a long way in that.
Right. Like we said, the entire manual process also goes a long way in defining the customer experience, right? It's not just about the digital world. It's about a combination of physical as well as digital. Right. Any other questions, Ankita?
I think this is all done. I mean, you all have covered most of the points, I'm sure. And are you sure this was your first virtual session?
This season.
This season, all right. Look like you've been nailing it. So with that said, Srinivas, I would like to say something. You mentioned that your dog agrees to what you say. He was barking at the background. You know what? That wasn't really, I mean, maybe I'm sure he agrees to you. That was just a shout out to me for missing out on introducing you during the introduction. So that said, ladies and gentlemen, we had Mr. Srinivas Kasturi, Global Head of Mass Payments and Country Product Management, Corporate Bank, Barclays. And with that, I would like to thank each one of you all, Ms. Geetika, Mr. Anand, Mr. Ankit, Ms. Jijy, Ms. Sharatee, and also Mr. Srinivas. Thank you so much for your valuable time. It was wonderful listening to each one of you all.